will see if I stand or if I... När kommer de här då? Kommer ministern så snart eller kommer de inte? De är inte med. Så då kan man ta bort dem där. Det är ju egentligen för de här. Aha. So there are also some excellent seats here on front row. So if you want to take the best pictures of the conference, please come and sit here. Well, I just want to see that you're with me. Well, Excellencies, distinguished guest of the conference Free to Create, I'm so happy to see you here back after a wonderful lunch and for the second plenary session. And the name of this session is Artistic Freedom for Whom? And I have a wonderful panel with me here today. My name is Kajsa Ravin. I'm the Director General of the Swedish Arts Council. It's a tongue twister to say it. And I'm very happy to be here and to host this session with colleagues from arts councils and foundations outside the European Union. So with me I have Abid Hussain, Director of Diversity at the Arts Council England. I have Simon Brault, who is the Director and CEO of the Canada Council. And I have from Ukraine my colleague Vladyslav Berkovski, Executive Director of the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation. So very welcome. Give them an applause. And now we will have a conversation, and we will start with some opening remarks by our panel. But I just want to frame this with some words first, because access to arts and culture is a human right. But as diverse as we humans are, as diverse and rich arts and culture requires to be. We need therefore to ensure artistic freedom and to include and broaden the possibilities for more people to pursue an artistic career. And I think many of us also have experiences from handling the pandemic for the creative sector, the culture and creative sector. And there are so many obstacles that we kind of noticed and identified then. But we also need to think about how to work to include more people in the arts, and both in participation and practice in many ways. And now we're going to hear some opening remarks, first from my colleague from Ukraine. So, dear Vladyslav, the floor is yours.
Дорогі колеги,
Dear colleagues,
я радий бути тут в Швеції, я радий бачити вас усіх, і я дякую моїм колегам на панелі.
I am very happy to be here in Sweden. I am happy to see all of you, and I am thankful for my colleagues with this panel to be here with me.
Це є мій другий виїзд з початку війни поза межі України. Я до того не виїжджав.
This is my second trip abroad from Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Before that, besides that, I didn't leave Ukraine.
Власне, я весь час Київ і околиці.
I'm always traveling in Kyiv and neighboring counties.
Питання нашої панелі для мене є насправді дуже складним.
The issues that are going to be handled by our panel, it's really complicated for me.
Тому що коли ми говоримо про свободу для артистів і артистична свобода для кого в умовах війни, це питання, яке ставить перед собою дуже багато задач, яких не було в мирний час.
You know, when we ask the question, the freedom for artists, artistic freedom for whom, this is topics and this is issues that we didn't have to handle before the war. That's why it's very complicated to task that we have before us.
Я представляю тут Український культурний фонд. Центральна і єдина в Україні організація, яка здійснює фінансування всієї сфери культури, мистецтв і креативних індустрій.
I represent here Ukrainian Cultural Foundation. This is the central agency in Ukraine that finances everything that's handling arts in Ukraine, all areas of arts, painting, creative arts, all kind of arts.
Щороку ми до війни підтримували приблизно близько 700-800 проєктів, які в сфері культури, які реалізовувалися на території України та поза її межами.
Every year before the war, we were supporting between 700 to 800 different artistic projects that were implemented in Ukraine and also beyond Ukraine.
З початком війни ситуація докорінно помінялася. Величезна кількість митців опинилася за кордоном, інша частина митців змушена була поміняти свій стиль життя і втратила можливості до вільного мистецтва.
With the beginning of war, the situation drastically changed because the many artists were forced to go abroad, and some artists that stayed in Ukraine that also changed their lifestyle.
Власне, з початком війни, оскільки ми всі були націлені на захист своєї держави і до сьогоднішнього дня націлені, наша основна задача полягає в чому? Перше, ми здійснюємо повний аналіз сфери культури, що відбувається, які є потреби, і це можна побачити на нашому сайті.
So our task and our work also has changed. What we do now, for us, the main goals, what we have to do, that's defend everything what's linked to the culture. So first of all, we do the complete analysis of the culture, what's going on, what needs to be done. And you can see all these topics discussed in our website.
З середини року, коли ми, скажу так, почали розуміти хоча б, що ми і де ми є, ми відкрили грантові програми для підтримки українських митців на території України.
So let's say not the beginning, the half of the year passed, and we started already to understand what we are, where we are, what to do. We started to offer the grant programs for artists.
В цілому, скажу невеличку статистику.
In general, I would like to offer you statistics.
На сьогоднішній день ми маємо понад 1180 об'єктів культури, які були зруйновані російськими військами.
So right now we do have, based on statistics, over 1,180 different cultural premises that were destroyed by the Russian army.
Ми опинилися в ситуації, коли на окупованих територіях повністю знищується будь-яка українська література.
We have a situation now that in the occupied territory, all and each of the literature that's linked to Ukrainian or it's Ukrainian, it's completely destroyed, it's abolished.
В Маріуполі, в Донецьку, в Луганську спалені бібліотеки, книжки будь-якого українського митця-літератора. Просто виносяться на вулицю і великими вогнищами паляться. Чи вам це нічого не нагадує з історії?
So, and huge cities, as we all know, Mariupol, Donetsk, Luhansk, the entire libraries are burned. The books of the Ukrainian artists, Ukrainian writers are being brought out and burned on the big fire outside. Don't this remind you on something?
In history, yeah? Митці. Найстрашніша для нас трагедія – це коли митця вбивають за те, що він митець.
You know, the most tragedy, the most of the terrible tragedies, it is a tragedy when the artist is being killed just because he or she is an artist.
Тому що він має свободу мислення. І за це його вбивають.
Because she or he has a freedom of thought, and that's the reason that he or she is being killed.
В окупованому Херсоні вбито було дирижера Херсонського оркестру, Херсонського театру. За що? За те, що він відмовився грати для росіян.
And the Kherson, the orchestra director of the Kherson theater was killed. For what? Because he refused to play for Russians.
В Бучі вбито було письменницю тільки за що? За те, що вона стала на захист старих людей. Просто стала, розставивши ось так руки. Молоду дівчину 20 років розстріляли.
In Bucha, the young Ukrainian writer was killed. For what reason? Because she stand up to protect elderly. Just like this, she spread her arms in front of the elderly people to protect them. And she was killed for that.
Під Харковом в Ізюмі вбили перекладача, митця. За що? За те, що він перекладав англійські твори українською мовою. Всього лише. За що?
In Izum, that's a small city next to Kharkiv, a translator, an artist was killed. What for? Only because he was a translator of the English language works into Ukrainian. You see? For what?
Я таких прикладів можу наводити безліч. Як це не страшно, но ми здійснюємо, ми зберемо цю статистику, страшну статистику. І в мене величезний приклад.
And I can go on and on. There are many examples like that. And it's as terrifying it is, but we do collect the statistics. I have a lot of statistical data about the things like that.
І насправді мені дуже боляче і важко говорити про це, тому що дуже багато чого я бачив на свої очі особисто.
In reality, it's very painful and difficult for me to talk about it because a lot of atrocities I have witnessed myself.
Зі Львова наші колеги, художники, просили мене заїхати подивитися, як їхні батьки. Я їх знайшов вбитими.
Colleagues from Lviv, painters, asked me to go and to check on their parents. You know, they wanted to know how they are. I went there. They were killed.
Я це все на свої очі бачив. Це все пройшло через мене.
You know, I saw all this with my own eyes. This all passed through me.
Але я трошки відійду від страшних речей і вернуся до теми, про яку ми сьогодні говоримо.
But I wanted now to put a little bit of distance from all these terrifying things, and I would like to come back to the issue, to the topic at hand now here.
Кайса, я не витратив свій час ще?
Because I'm okay with time?
Отже ж, коли ми говоримо зараз про культуру і про свободу митця в умовах війни.
So now when we are talking about the culture and artistic freedom and the war time,
Ми маємо 3 питання перед собою.
we have 3 questions in front of us.
First question. Перше питання. Наскільки обмеження свободи митця можуть бути в умовах війни?
How much could be limited artistic freedoms within the times of war.
Наскільки доцільно обмежувати свободу митця в умовах війни?
What would be the reason, how useful would it be to limit artistic freedom during the wartime?
Зараз ми в Українському культурному фонді проводимо велику дискусію щодо того, війна триває уже рік, і є окремі теми, які стосуються національної безпеки.
Now in our Ukrainian Cultural Fund, we have discussions because, as you know, the war is waging already for 1 year, and there are a lot of topics with regard to the national security and safety.
І відповідно до цього перед митцями поставлено обмеження. І ми зараз намагаємось дослідити, чи ці обмеження не виходять поза рамки правдивої необхідності. Тому що це потрібно чітко відслідковувати.
And right now, because of that, we are seeing how much this limitation are founded and limitation of artistic freedom, how much are they founded? Really, are they beyond or are they too much maybe limited in their artistic freedom during this time?
Друге питання. Наскільки населення хоче отримувати культуру? Ми, власне, нещодавно провели таке дослідження.
You know, another issue is what is the level of the people's interested to receiving the culture? Because recently we have conducted such an evaluation, yes.
Let us come back to that.
Давайте повернемось.
Окей.
Yes. Thank you so much with sharing these stories, because to understand the framework of artistic freedom in wartime, it is almost impossible for us who live in peaceful countries to understand the implications of war on artistic freedom. So thank you for sharing that with us. But we will come back to how this also, what the implications are for the public to take part of art. But please. Because Abid Hussain, you are working in a quite different context in the UK, in England, the Arts Council of England, and you have your strategy, Let's Create. Yes. But you are also a country that are not longer a member of the European Union. And, well, tell us a bit about the context you work in and the challenges you are facing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And firstly, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum and peace be on you all. I think that's a very pertinent point to start on. And it's been a very painful process today to hear the stories of colleagues working in Ukraine. I am a British Muslim of Pakistani heritage. My parents came to the UK from Pakistan. We're from a part of Pakistan called Kashmir. And Kashmir is divided into, there's an occupied part of Kashmir, which has been occupied for over 50 years. Probably 3 or 4 wars have been fought by Pakistan and India. Both possess nuclear weapons, and the only victims are the people of Kashmir. But we are the subject of United Nations resolutions that have never delivered. And it's brought back a lot of pain in terms of my parents' journey. And so my prayers and my thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. And I think it's a reminder that throughout the world, and there's a beautiful poem by a Somali artist called Warsan Sheri, and she talks about wherever you put your hand on the globe, there's pain everywhere. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And I think it's important for me to start with that personal introduction, because in many respects, I'm a senior leader working in the arts and cultural sector who is the product of migration, who is a minority leader. Quite often, I find myself in rooms like this where I may be the only person or one of a handful of people. If anybody is flying from the airport tomorrow, you don't want to stand behind me in the queue. I had a much warmer welcome to this conference than my brief interaction with immigration at Stockholm Airport. all of that's important because when we developed Let's Create, we decided to develop a strategy where we wanted to talk to people. We consulted with over 6,000 people, from artists to arts organizations to the general public. And the general public was really key. We spoke to young people, we spoke to older people, and we asked them what they wanted. We launched our strategy in January 2020. January the 30th, the UK left Europe. Brexit happened. In March of that year, the entire arts and cultural sector in the UK and across the world closed down because of COVID. And in May of that year, George Floyd was murdered in the US, and there was a huge conversation about social justice. So what happens when you develop a strategy pre-pandemic, pre-exit from Europe, and pre all the social injustice factors? How do you deliver that strategy? So we've spent a lot of time developing a delivery plan that could begin to respond to some of those issues. So I want to talk to those three key themes. Brexit was significant because we're only beginning to feel the impact now, because to all intents and purposes, borders were closed throughout the world. I know for a fact many European artists who would have called the UK home decided to leave. So we lost a lot of artistic talent. A lot of our companies are finding it much more challenging to tour in Europe, and we have greater bureaucracy that we need to deal with. COVID was really significant. If we look at the data from COVID, the people who were most vulnerable to COVID in that first phase were people from ethnic minorities, people who were disabled. These are the communities that are most underrepresented in the arts and cultural sector, and the events that happened in the US were more broadly reminded us of the importance of today's topic, freedom of speech and freedom of artistic expression, because quite often it's linked to who we give resources to. And I think in the audience today we have some incredibly powerful people. You run your ministries, you advise your governments, you decide where the resources go. And one of my key provocations to you is, what can you do in your roles to support the voices that are not supported? And that was a key part of our strategy. We've recently concluded an investment round, and there were two balancing criteria. One, we wanted more equitable geographic distribution of our investments. So historically, the majority of funding went to London. We wanted to level that out. Secondly, we were very honest and very direct that we needed to more equitably distribute our funding to recognize some communities haven't received funding. And it takes a lot of courage for a funder to say we will be more equitable in our distribution of funding. And equity is different to equality, because equity recognizes you need to do more to support those voices that haven't been supported. When we made our decisions, we have now invested 113 million over 3 years in Black-led organizations. For the first time ever, we have Black and disability-led organizations in our portfolio who get more than £1 million a year. Those decisions were not easy. Existing organizations had to lose funding. We had to cut funding in certain places. But I think that's the really key challenge that we face as policymakers, because very rarely do we have a situation where the funding increases. And I think the challenge for us when we're talking about artistic freedom is, how do we decide to make decisions? Who do we decide to empower? And I guess the provocation I would leave in closing is, think about in your communities, who is missing from the conversations, who's not in your auditoriums. We recently published the census data in the UK. I live in a city called Birmingham. 35% of the community in Birmingham are of Muslim faith. So 35% of audiences are Muslim. If you go to Leicester, London, Luton or Birmingham, the majority of the population is non-white British. How do we welcome them in? And when we welcome them in, to kind of make them feel that they're valued, they're respected, and also making sure our funding reaches creatives from those communities. I can share lots of data later, but I will stop now and hand over to Simone.
Thank you so much, Abid. Give him a hand as well. Well, Simone, I know that in a Canadian context, you actually doubled your budget a few years ago, and you have also worked with your strategy arts now more than ever. Please tell me about the Canadian context and situation.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that I'm very honored to be here with my colleagues. In my country lives the largest Ukrainian population outside of Ukraine, and it's a vivid conversation. So I'm very, very honored to be near you, and obviously work a lot because on top of being the CEO of the Canada Council for the Arts, which is the main arts funder in Canada, we fund both organizations, institutions, thousands of individual artists, groups of artists. I'm also the chair of IFACCA, which is the International Federation of Arts Councils. So we work together with other arts councils in the world. I will go directly to the topic because, strangely enough, for me, trying to grasp what is the significance of artistic freedom inside rich and wealthy countries is a big issue. We're very aware, obviously, of the threat to artistic freedom all over the world. But strangely enough, in a country like Canada, artistic freedom is one of the main arguments used by people to justify status quo and the refusal of redistribute power, influence, access, and money to other artists or populations than the white majority. So it's very interesting that the last big public debate we had on artistic freedom, for instance, were around the question that we decided in Canada that we would not support touring in Russia or presentation of famous Russian artists in Canada. And we were accused of limiting artistic freedom. Same thing on the indigenous issues in my country. In Canada, there are roughly 1,300,000 indigenous people. So that's First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people on a country of 38 million. So it's a significant part of the population. And in my country, we admitted finally that we have been practicing for hundreds of years cultural genocide towards the indigenous population. So as the leader of the Arts Council, as the public funder, we cannot support indigenous art the way we support any other art creation in our country. We need to go through a process of decolonizing. We need to deconstruct our understanding of what is art and what is artistic excellence that is very much defined with a Eurocentric vision of art, very situated in a moment of the history of arts and also of spoliation by the metropolis, the European metropolis all over the world, in Africa and everywhere. So we are in this process right now of deconstructing how we see art, how we define artistic excellence, who we do give access to in our granting programs, to make sure that art will be is a right, that there's a relevance for anyone living in our country. And it leads to very challenging discussions because we realized that, yes, we had the doubling of our budget in the recent years, and during that moment of doubling, we kind of redistribute, where the money was going. It was not hurting so much the one who already had money because we were growing, but that period of time is over now. And what we're trying to do is really to use the notion of redistributive justice, understanding that in the art system we need to do both some kind of a horizontal redistribution Horizontal redistribution is really, to which issues are you paying more attention without, considering the wealth and all that, but making sure that, you have that very large vision. But we also need to discuss vertical redistribution, which is, where do you put the money exactly in the system? And it's a very interesting discussions, because my plea is that if we are not ready and willing, and if we don't show solidarity in that movement of redistribution, our arts sector has no future. Because the future of the arts sector is absolutely connected to its social relevance and to the fact that people at the street level will recognize themselves in what they see on stage, on what they read, what they enjoy, the music they listen to. And at this very moment in my country, we still invest the majority of our resources to support an art that interests less and less people, more and more aging people, and we realize that we need to change the tide. And if we don't do it right now, because there's a momentum in Canada and worldwide, we will miss the opportunity to make sure that arts and culture will remain a fundamental dimension of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. So back to you, Vladyslav, talking about the relevance of art and culture in a situation of war. And if you have not visited the website of the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation, I can remind you to do so later on. You are doing a lot of research, and you follow up with data on both your public and young people and older people, and also the arts field, how they, what their status is at the moment. So please tell us a bit about the relevance of arts and culture and the differences that you have identified in different groups of people in Ukraine at the moment.
Перш за все, Кайса, хочу сказати, що власне основна дослідницька робота у нас була в 22-му році. Зараз, в 23-му, ми вже ведемо класичну нашу грантову роботу на основі тих досліджень, які ми провели.
First of all, I would like to mention that the main research work was done in 2022. Right now, what we do, we try to implement grants based on the research that was performed previously.
В грудні минулого року ми провели дослідження щодо того, що потребують українці в умовах війни.
Last year, in December 2022, we conducted a research on the topic, what do Ukrainians need in the wartime?
Дослідження показало, що у нас утворилося дві групи. Група молодих людей і група старшого покоління. Старше покоління – це ті, хто мають понад 35 років.
Okay, based on this research, research showed that we have practically two big groups, the young people group and elderly group.
Elder.
But elderly, relatively elderly, because elderly after 35 years old. So it's
Like me.
І що показало дослідження? Старше покоління впродовж року було більш концентроване на пошуку їжі, безпеки, виживання.
and what our research showed, that the second group was mostly concentrated on the following issue: search for food, safety and general survival.
Молодше покоління більше було сконцентровано на пошукові культурних послуг. Clubbing, dancing and others.
And the younger generation was more concentrated to search of some cultural things. And it was done in English.
Yes. Але ситуація раптово міняється з серпня місяця.
But starting in August of last year, of course, the situation drastically changes.
Молодше покоління без змін практично, натомість старше покоління починає звертатися все більше в сферу культури.
So practically the first group, no changes, practically no changes. But the second group, more and more, is turning toward the cultural sphere.
І ми почнемо спостерігати потребу в виставках, в театральних постановках, в кіно, в мистецькій діяльності. Люди хочуть мистецтва.
So what we are trying to see that the people want to see more exhibition, more theater pieces, more films, and in general they want to have more artistic activities.
Далі. Наступне дуже цікаве спостереження, яке стосується саме молодої групи, відповідно до її розміщення на території України чи поза межами України.
And the next, it was very interesting also to see that's the younger population. It depends, the changes also depend where are they located, in Ukraine or beyond, abroad.
Ті, хто знаходяться в Україні, долучаються до мистецтва і починають відвідувати виставки, вони починають креативити, вони хочуть брати участь в культурних заходах, я би сказав, високого мистецтва.
So the young people who stayed in Ukraine, they are becoming more active in the artistic creative arts area. They participate more in exhibitions. They are more active in all what's linked to the culture.
Натомість, ті, хто опинилися за кордоном, як мені це не прикро визнавати, але в них надалі залишається dancing, clubbing.
Unfortunately, and it's really terrible for me to say it here, but the people who left Ukraine and are abroad, for them, the main things are still the same.
So I will continue because this is I think this is highlighting actually what you were saying, because if you live in a democratic and peaceful country, but you still have these immense tensions between the history and the present, would you say, Abid and Simon, that the cultural institutions don't have a future when it comes to the redistribution, but the relevance of arts and culture and for plural voices? Is that what you say, Simon?
What I'm saying is that in my country right now, the discussion is really around the question of, in a sense, the end of this notion of art for art's sake. So say that we have been, and I've been trained in school with a vision of the role of art that was really that art was about expressing, the artistic voices. Without any consideration to the market, to the social issues, and so there was this sense that it was some kind of a neutral space. I think people see more and more that they are asking artists and the art sector and the funders of the art sector to be more inclusive of the entire population living in the country, and in fact paying for public subsidizing of the arts. So that question of inclusion is a top priority. So I mentioned indigenous, but obviously, Canada, 40% of the population comes from abroad, migrants, and more than 30% of the population don't speak one or the two official languages. So this question of making sure that we have an arts sector that is in fact reflecting the reality of the population is absolutely paramount right now. And in order to make this happen, you kind of need to be able to reframe your understanding of what is art, your understanding of the hierarchy of arts form that has been very strong, with classical music and jazz there and hip hop there, so for a funder. But so we kind of need to address that, and we need to address that and make decisions in terms of offering the possibility of expressions to a lot of people who have been and in communities that have been intentionally kept away from it. And I think this is what is happening right now is quite a revolution for an organization like the Canada Council for the Arts or for ACE or organizations like that, because we have been, our DNA has been to support very specific arts form, again, very rooted in a moment of history that was very different from today. So we are in this, and we know that an arts council can make decisions that the government is not willing yet to make. For instance, in our country, we had a huge truth and reconciliation process with Indigenous people. The government committed a lot of resources, but the Arts Council decided first, even before the conclusion of that, to create its own department with Indigenous people working, leading the department, and the entire staff is Indigenous. We decided to triple the level of our own investment there. And we also decided to change the way we assess Indigenous art, because we know that art has such a symbolic and political power on society. So we felt, and we did not ask permission to our government, we felt that as an arts council, because we are arts land from the government, we decided, okay, this is our duty if we want today to support artistic expression in this country, to try to repair and eventually reverse the cultural genocide that happens in our country, and by the same fact opening the doors to a lot of racialized artists in the country who also felt excluded. So because we're inviting so many people at the table right now, the question of redistribution is unavoidable. It's a positive redistribution. I mean, a lot of people don't feel that at the very beginning, but their own future, if their audience is not more diverse, will be compromised. So we feel that this moment of redistribution is also a moment of salvation for the entire arts sector, and not only a moment for the emergence of new artists that have not been supported before.
Thank you, Simon. Abid, culture institution versus people. If you look 10 years ahead, what will the landscape be in England?
I think what's I think what's really interesting is the impact of COVID was the people that suffer most are the individual practitioners. So the organizations get funded, they can restructure, but the freelancers, the independent creatives who had their work cancelled. So I think there's a really interesting challenge for ministries and funding departments on how do we better support individuals. We're very good at kind of saying here's training and development budgets, but would we trust an individual artist to be funded at the same level as an institution? One example I can give is we have some of the best disabled artists in the world in the UK. They probably get more work internationally than they have in the UK. Many of them don't want to set up organizations, but they only set up organizations and institutions because the funders say if you want a certain amount of funding, you need to have the governance structures, etc. So I think there's a real challenge for us in terms of how we think about how we work with individuals. On the panel, we've talked about older people and younger people, and I think our communities will have more young people and more older people, and that brings tensions. When I talked earlier about our strategy, our two priorities were geography and diversity. Sometimes there was a tension between the two. Certain places where we wanted to level up, we have no diversity. So it's very hard to meet all of your criteria. And I think as funding agencies, we really need to be a little bit more agile. And my takeaway from the impact of COVID was we made decisions in 6 weeks that would take us 2 to 3 years to normally make. We showed that we could work differently. But my biggest fear is now as we return to a sense of more normal environments, we're kind of going back to the way we did things. And the only time I've seen arts councils become a little bit more open to innovation risk was during the impact of the pandemic. And we shouldn't lose sight of the things we did well. And that's my worry. So I think if we want to be relevant over the next 10 years, we do need to kind of think about who we invite to the conversations. And it's that point that you made very eloquently around redistribution. It will be painful because we're asking organizations that have historically received millions and millions of pounds, euros, kronas to either take a little bit less or sometimes say, we're not going to fund you and we need to fund something else. And everybody is supportive of redistribution until you have to pay the bill. And that's something we're dealing with in the UK because there's been a huge kickback against some of the decisions we've made because some of the organisations we've chosen to give less to or organisations we've chosen to take money away are probably more influential than the Arts Council. They have direct lines to politicians, the media, and you need courage as a ministry or a funding agency, and you're not going to get thanks for the change that you make, but maybe in 10 years' time, that next generation will recognise you made the decisions that enabled hip-hop to be recognised as much as ballet. And in Europe, I guess the big challenge is we have a very historic heritage cultural scene, and Europe is also seeing a lot of immigration. And the way we get to know people is through their food and their culture. Europe is much better at welcoming the food of its immigrant communities and less welcoming of opening up to its culture. And if we can make that same progress, it'll be beneficial to all of us.
Thank you. Last but not least, I want to pose a question to you, Vladyslav. 10 years ahead, Ukraine is free for many, many years, of course. What have we done to support you to have artistic freedom and a flourishing cultural life in Ukraine? What do you need from us? In a few words.
Напевно, я скажу про два рівні, які нам дуже необхідні.
Probably I'll mention here two levels that's very, very needed for us.
Перше, мистецтво стало доступним для населення. В першу чергу на регіональному рівні.
Firstly, the arts is more accessible to the people. And first of all, on the regional level.
Ми маємо на сьогоднішній день велику диспропорцію, великий добрий доступ до мистецтв в столичному рівні і практично, який опускається до нуля на регіональному рівні. Ми за 10 років це поміняємо.
Because currently we have huge disproportion. There is very easy, a lot of access to culture in the big cities, in the capital city, and it's going down the slope to the regional level. And of course, in 10 years, it will be changed.
Друге, чи перше?
Second or first?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Це дуже специфіка України. Українці не є індивідуалістами. Українці в сфері культури радше організовані в організації.
And second or first, Ukrainians are not individualists. They are more organized when we talk about the cultural area and some organizations.
Наведу приклад.
As an example.
В цьому році зараз ми проводимо грантову програму. У нас 600 заявок від організацій і тільки 80 від індивідуальних митців.
So as an example, we, for example, now conduct a grant program to give grants to organizations or people, and we have applications from 600 organizations and only 80 individual applications.
Я би хотів бачити більше, коли митці особисто стають звертатися. Олеся, я бачу, що ти задаєш питання. Я все бачу.
And what we would like to see, we like see the individual artists more applying themselves. And Olesa, I see you have a question. I see everything. She's there.
Це дискусія завжди з представниками кіноспільноти. У нас вона давно ведеться.
And this is a discussion that we have with a representative of cultural community. We have this discussion going on and on.
Well, I just want to say that we are going to be with you, stand with Ukraine. So we will continue to be your friends and allies. So thank you so much for taking part in this conversation, all three of you, from Ukraine, from Canada, from England. Give them a warm applause. And before I give the word over to Stefan, who will come with some practical information, if you are interested in safeguarding artistic freedom on a global level, welcome back to Stockholm in May when IFACCA and the Swedish Arts Council have the World Summit on Arts and Culture in Stockholm. So check out also that website. So Stefan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes. And I'd like us to thank Ludmila Lansuta-Davis also for interpreting this today. And now some practical information. So this is the second opportunity to listen to the 4 breakout sessions. And I will repeat the rooms that they're in so that you will find the breakout session that you chose. And if you're uncertain about which breakout session you registered for, there are lists at the door, just so that, everyone finds the room that they have chosen or that they would like to listen to. And they start at 14:15. So you have some time to drink more coffee, as I promised. And you will realize, I think, that during a conference, coffee is a very good thing. So you'll become increasingly more Swedish, I think, as the day goes along. And the first breakout session, Artistic Freedom for Indigenous Peoples, is in room 4. The breakout session, Building an Inclusive Creative Community, is in room 1. The breakout session, Protecting Artists Under Threat, is in room 6. And The Right to Shine is in room 2. And then we will all meet here again for a plenary session, and that will be at 15:30. So enjoy the coffee.